Gregg, I've been looking forward to this. Happy 2024. Your wisdom, your insights, your brilliance, it really is something that I just feel can uplift our world and humanity. And so I'm grateful for you, for your time, for being back here. And just let's getting into this conversation. We were talking before I started to hit record. Thank you for being here, though, first and foremost.
Well, Julie, thank you for having me back. It's the first time you and I have seen one another. New Year, happy 2024. I think we all feel, and now we're seeing this is going to be a really extraordinary year in a lot of ways. Not necessarily a bad year, but I think it's going to be a challenging year because our belief systems are going to be challenged, and we're going to be pushed to the very edge of who we believe we are and what we claim is true in our hearts. And we're going to be pushed to reconcile what we believe in our hearts with what the real world shows us. And I think to some degree, it's probably already happening toward the end of last year and then this year, and we can certainly talk about that. So this first time you and I have been together in this program, thank you. You never really know what I'm going to say, so thank you for your trust, number one, and thank you for making the time to share me with your community. That means a lot to me. It really does. And this is unscripted, Julie. We never know precisely where we're going to go. I trust you implicitly. It's a beautiful dance. I'm going to follow the lady's lead wherever the lady leads us, and nothing's off the table for me. I want to say that. So wherever you lead us, I'm really happy to honor our community by talking about things that are real and relevant in our lives. We can talk about esoteric things, and it's interesting. Doesn't necessarily maybe have the relevance in our lives. So I'm going to trust you to lead us wherever you feel your community and my family is best served.
Mm. Thank you so much. I feel the same implicit trust. And I will say before we even started, because I know whenever I have a conversation with you, Gregg, it is mind blowing and expansive. And I said a little prayer and intention, and I just called in. You've
Mm.
written all about the beautiful divine matrix, and I just called in my understanding of this divine matrix, and I just said, please guide this because there is so much happening in the world right now. A lot of turbulence, a lot of shift. We have an election year here in the States, and I was thinking, I know from so many listeners that write in about this time also in the midst of a lot of challenge and dark times, that there's this
Yeah.
desire, to shift our own consciousness and awaken and tap into our hearts and heart intelligence. And I think that might be a good place to start. I know it's a huge question. It keeps coming to me is, how do we do this in a real way when there are all kinds of, challenges
Sure.
and atrocities happening, and an interesting year ahead? Like, where do we start, and how do we do this work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think there's any single solution. I think there are probably many answers. What I have found in our community, and like you, the end of the year was tough because of what's happening in the Middle East, certainly, and in other places. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in our country. You and I live in America, and our country is not the country that we had at the beginning of the year last year, and we're all seeing, to the degree that we will allow ourselves to see it, we're seeing these changes happen. One of the things I'm seeing happening, Julie, it's a psychological term. It's called normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is when we witness or experience things that are so foreign to our belief system, to our expectation, to our worldview, that we will not allow ourselves to acknowledge these things are even happening. I'll give you a classic textbook example. I'm not saying this is happening now, but if you read about normalcy bias in a psychology textbook, they will give World War II and the Holocaust as an example. In Poland, there were people that saw their friends and neighbors, loved ones, family members take a suitcase. They were allowed one suitcase and board a train. And the story that they told one another to make sense of this is that the people on the train were the lucky ones because they were being relocated to a new city, a new life, new jobs, while the war was being prosecuted in their home. They had heard rumors about the camps, about Auschwitz and Treblinka and the death camps, but their normalcy bias would not allow them to fathom that such large numbers of people could be systematically herded off that way. So they never let that enter their mind. And in a very real sense, it's not on the same magnitude, certainly, but we're seeing a degree of change in the world and certainly in our own country. And there's a tendency to overlook it, normalcy bias, to accept and normalize things in our lives that we would never accept and normalize in a million years in a sane world. Uh, Indoctrination of our children in public schools in certain ways, healthcare practices, all kinds of things. And what happens, you and I talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button, is when you live in a world and something comes along that is outside of that norm, and in in a typical world you wouldn't accept it, but you do. You go along with it because everybody else is, or we're being, the media says it's okay, or all of our friends say it's okay, and you begin to normalize something in your life that you would never accept in a million years. So now what used to be normal for you here is no longer there. It's over here. All right. So he's, no big deal. Life still goes on. Still got, job, kids are healthy. So now something else comes along and you do that again, and it takes you from here over to here and from here over to there. Pretty soon you wake up one morning and you are so far away from the norms of what you would want your children to accept and what you'd want to live in your life. And you say, how did we get here? That's kind of what's happening in the world right now, not just in America. And you said we have an election year this year. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but something is happening on planet Earth that has never happened in the modern world. 40 Western nations are having elections this year. 40 nations are now up choosing new leaders, and there's a tremendous concern among some circles that those leaders going to conform with the ideology moving the world in a direction of centralization and control, or are those leaders going to opt for sovereignty and freedom? And we don't know the answer to that until those elections happen. So it's a big year for the world, not just for America. What I think is I'm seeing happen, and October 7th really brought it to the forefront, Julie, and I don't want to dwell on it. It's important, and it happens to be the pivotal moment that for many people brought into focus something that they didn't want to have in focus, that they didn't want to deal with, and now they're forced to because these events happened. And that is, how do we respond? How do we respond to those things? So let me, we talked off camera a little bit, and I'm just going to reiterate some of that. What I want our viewers to know, it's a difficult conversation. I was in London in my hotel room 2 hours before I went on stage when the news feeds started coming in of what was happening, and especially at the Nova Music Festival. And so I saw that America was asleep because of the time difference. They were, I think, 7 hours behind. When I got back to the hotel room that night, I started watching the US. I don't usually watch TV, but I tuned into the networks to see what was going on. And here's what I saw, Julie. The news feeds that America was allowed to share with everyday people was very different from the news feeds originally coming out of the Middle East, out of Eastern Europe, out of Asia. And the reason I'm saying this is because America has not been allowed to see the truth of what happened on October 7th. Part of that is politically driven narrative. Part of that is the social media algorithms will not allow, for community guidelines, they won't allow the images. The net result is we have a generation of young people who say that the atrocities never happened. They're saying if they did happen, we would have seen them. or if they did happen, why don't we know about them? And so they are now uh, not having that information. They are making choices in their lives and publicly protesting in ways that don't make a lot of sense. It makes sense to them based upon this skewed and distorted information that they were given. And to some degree, that's happening to all of us. We are all casualties to some degree because we are not really being allowed to see. We're seeing distorted views of what happens in Ukraine, of what's happening at the Texas border right now, of what happens socially. And all of this is dividing, it's breaking the social bonds that have held our families together for generations, that have held our communities together, our societies, and ultimately our nation. So we have become a very divided nation because the social bonds are being broken through misinformation, disinformation, and a lot of it, I believe, is intentional because there is an effort to create a more vulnerable society, and and this has deeply spiritual implications. But when we don't have those social bonds, Julie, we are susceptible and vulnerable to the ideas and the policies of others that want to drive us in a certain direction. Right now, we're being driven towards centralization, uh, toward control, loss of freedoms across the board, and a lot of it is coming from, from the UN. A lot of it is coming from other organizations linked to the UN. We can do a whole conversation on that. Everybody knows. I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't already know. The point is, we have to deal with it. This is what's up for us every day in our lives, and what I have found in my community, for example, I'll just take the atrocities in Ukraine and what's happening in Ukraine, because the war crimes are happening there as well, or the war crimes that are happening in the Middle East, in Israel. What it does, Julie, is it triggers something deep within us. And the management of the information triggers very precise reactions. Primal instincts are triggered when we see women and children abused and killed. Primal instincts are triggered when we see helpless families and the elderly. And we then want to react. And what's happening, my friends, some of them you have on this program, authors that people know, they don't know what to do because they are feeling an anger, they're feeling a hate, they're feeling rage, they want revenge in some cases based upon the narratives that they're being shown. So what do we do with that? How do we deal with that in a healthy way? What I have found, and this is where it is a really deeply spiritual conversation, is it's less about how we respond and more about what we become in the presence of that response. Do we allow what we see in the media to make us into something that we would never choose to be in a million years? Do we allow the narrative that has been carefully honed to trigger us? Do we allow that to reduce us to this primal instinctual level where we lash out in hate and anger and revenge? And we have to ask ourselves, when we feel those reactions, which are perfectly normal human reactions, they're being engineered. When we feel those, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, is this information making me into something that I don't want to be? Is it making me become? Because we are not healthy when we go through our day carrying the hate and the anger and the feeling for the need for revenge. So when we find ourselves in those reactions, we have to ask, are we reacting from the love of what we know is possible and true in our lives, or are we reacting from the hate or the fear of what that information is triggering within us? And the answer to that question then takes us to the next steps in terms of what we need to do. if we find ourselves being triggered in fear, where does that fear come from? How could something halfway around the world incite fear inside of us in our homes? What is it lighting up? What fear in our lives has never been resolved? What trauma has never been resolved? And and I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, or wrong. This is where we are right now in our world, because there's so many events and so many atrocities that are happening. Uh, when we respond, are we going to respond in a healthy way? So now there are some people I've had, there's the argument about the inner warrior. Do you fight or do you turn the other cheek? And for me, I think it's less about what we do again, and more about what we become. If we choose to fight, whatever that means, if it's a kinetic fight or if it's a social media fight, if it's a verbal confrontation, whatever it is, does that come from the love of those behind us, our family and our loved ones, or does it come from the hate of those that we perceive to be our enemies? Do we fight from the love of what we know is possible, or from the fear of what happens if we don't? And there's a lot of narratives out there about fear, inciting fear in people, uh, that what you're seeing happening over there can happen right here. So it's an important conversation. It's difficult because there are so many other narratives and so much baggage that come with it. But on the ultimate deeply, I'll ask your permission. Do I have your permission to go to the ultimate deeply spiritual level? Are you okay with that?
Oh, I'm like waiting for it.
All
Yeah,
right. So
please.
I think all
Yeah.
of this, although it is current in our lives now, is actually part of something very ancient and very primal that has been with us from the very beginning. It's a battle between good and evil, not from a religious sense, but we live in a polarity world. And in a polarity world, both of those must be present. The question is, what do we identify with, and what do we choose to dominate our world? And you're seeing that battle play out in media, in entertainment, in politics. You're seeing it play out kinetically in what happened at that Nova Music Festival and beyond. You're seeing it happen with what's happening in Ukraine. A lot of people don't know this. U.S. has boots on the ground. We're involved in wars, 22 wars on the planet right now. Most of them you never hear about. Most of them you never hear a word about. And all of them are carrying the same message. These events, Ukraine and what's happened in the Middle East, happen to be lighting it up for us front and center. And we have to choose. We have to make a stand. Do we identify with the evil, or do we identify with the good? And what do we allow? What do we normalize in our lives and accept into our society? And again, it's a question we have to answer together. It can't be done for us. But it's difficult when the events are weaponized to divide us rather than used to bring us together in kindness so that we can work together to create a better world. That's a possibility, but that's not what's happening right now. And there's more of us than there is of they. We haven't even talked about who the they are, but there's more of us. We get to choose. And I think it's really important now, Julie, because I think you have a very sophisticated audience, and that's why I really enjoy coming on with your audience, because we don't have to start at ground zero every time. We can assume certain things are known and accepted. One of those is, I think we can all agree and assume that there's a new world emerging that's not quite here yet. And the old world that we grew up with, it's still there, but it's buckling and collapsing because it's unsustainable in its present form. So that new world's not here yet because we're still building it. I don't know everyone in your community or on this podcast, but I bet I know this about everyone. I would imagine anyone watching this does not want to carry the hurt from the world that we've known into that new world as the foundation of that new world for our children. We don't want to carry the suffering that we've known in the 19th and the 20th centuries and the Holocausts and the atrocities, humans against humans. We don't want to carry that into the new world. And it's up for us to heal right now. If we respond with hate and anger, doesn't mean we don't fight, but do we fight from hate and revenge, or do we fight from the love of what we know is possible in our lives, what we want for our children? That becomes that keystone or the cornerstone or the foundation of that new world. I think we are dealing with generational healing right now. So I just covered a lot of ground. I said a lot. I'm going to pause and I'm going to just ask you if it makes sense. And maybe you have other guests talking about the same thing. And where do they chime in on this?
Well, first of all, there is so much in what you just said, and I love that you went to the deep end of the spiritual pool. And these are the questions that I've been getting from our beautiful listeners, my
Yeah.
own soul. Um, and I think this where I felt the lighting up is, this archaic world, the past traumas, and the new world emerging, and kind of how do we, I know anybody watching or listening right now, like attracts like, is here
Yeah.
because they want to come, you want to come from love, you want to come from healing, you want to come from, makes me want to cry even just saying it. I can feel it,
Yeah.
being a part of something better, more beautiful, more loving. I think of your book about the divine matrix, and to me it's like I literally read and like submerge myself in that daily because I just
Hmm.
love to be reminded that there's something greater that's loving, that is in every cell and atom and every aspect of who we are. And so what I'm hearing or sensing, it's like, how do we, and I don't mean this in a Pollyanna way, but like, how do we dive into that responding from love, knowing this is what's going on, creating that new world, and also being aware that we're being fed a lot of fear and a lot of, as you said, meant to be vulnerable. And maybe I'll start there.
Well, I think, again, I don't think there's a single answer or a single solution. I think there are many answers. However, people are feeling drawn to respond that's their choice. I think where the spirituality comes is being conscious of what drives that response. Am I responding because I'm afraid of the world if I don't, or what will happen to me if I don't? Or I'll just be very honest. When October 7th happened, I looked to our spiritual community and you could hear a pin drop in the room because our spiritual leaders were absent in mass. And I've called some of them and I've talked to them. I'm said, where are you guys? Your community needs you to help them navigate what's happening here. Some of them have found that their teachings are shallow teachings. They're not bad and they're not wrong. They are just shallow. They're good time spirituality. And it's easy to be a spiritual person when the world looks rosy and rainbows. When something crosses your path, if your spiritual practice does not serve you, you have to ask, why is that? And what can I do to embrace a deeper spirituality? And some I know people that are struggling because their teachings are not serving their community in the face of what we're seeing happening in the world. It's a hard conversation, Julie, and it's very honest. It's a very honest conversation. Some of the spiritual teachers said they just can't see it. They said, I can't watch this. It's too hard. I talked to somebody that says, I'm just going to go to the beach and do my yoga. I can't deal with it. And we all feel like that sometimes. We have to take a break. But we're blessed to have a beach to go to do our spiritual practice. And some of our brothers and sisters are just trying to make it through the day. And there are a lot of people in our community that are afraid to say anything because they're going to lose clicks on YouTube. They're going to have people unsubscribe. They're going to be, they know they're going to catch flack and they don't want that flack. So they're just not saying anything. And all of those are choices. I'm not saying they're right, wrong, good, or bad. What I'm saying is we're a family and we're going through something and we need one another and we need one another's guidance and teachings and experience. And there isn't a single answer. I think there are many, many possibilities because we all learn differently. So I think what's really important for me, and it's what my test, because I'm right there with you, and I'm right there with our community. When I hear something or I see something, and somebody tells me, or it's on a video somebody sends me, or something like that, when I feel that primal gut response that makes me want to lash out, I have to ask myself, where's that coming from? Number one, and we all have an inner warrior, and it's there for a reason. I don't think it's just about complacency. I don't think it's just about turning the other cheek. We have to act sometimes. When we fail to act early on, when the signs of, in this case, evil are apparent, and we normalize that evil, then it becomes greater and greater and greater until the point where we have to act. We all saw this in World War II. If we had not acted as allies in the West and we'd allowed Hitler to continue his conquest, we would live in a very different world today. So we had to act. So again, it's not that we need to not act, but on a spiritual level, what's compelling us to act? We'll get through this, and there will be a time you and I have this conversation. All of this is in the rearview mirror. It's all already happened. The question is, what have we become? What kind of people have we become when this is over? And we have the opportunity now to become conscious and ask that question, consciously aware of what we're doing. And I know people that are reduced to the most primal, instinctive levels of pure revenge and hate, and they're allowing the hate to consume them. So hate has a chemical consequence. It kicks up the stress hormones in the body, high levels of cortisol, high levels of adrenaline that last day after day after day, not just for a short period of time. It becomes the filter, the lens through which they see all the events in life and all the events in the world. And they begin to lump categories of people together, and that hate begins to define other categories of people that have nothing to do with what's happening in the Middle East. I'm seeing that happen right now. And this is a spiritual exercise. Do we allow ourselves to succumb to that? Or can we draw a line and say, we will not tolerate this level of evil because we love our world, we love our children, we love our future, and we love ourselves enough to draw the line and say, this cannot be tolerated. What does it take? Now, what does it take to follow up, to make it clear that that evil cannot exist? So I don't know if any of that makes any sense. It's up for me as well, for a lot of reasons. I was supposed to be leading a group in Israel in November. This happened October 7th. And of course, I knew that we wouldn't be there in November. But all of our guides, our Palestinian guides, they text me, they're afraid. They think everybody's mad at them and people don't like them, and they want to take them off the face of the earth. And my Israeli friends, they don't know. They said, we don't know where this is going to go. We don't know what to do. This isn't us. This isn't what we want. Yet it's happening. And there's a lot of people in the world that want something more than this. So I think we're all being, I don't think it's a test. I think it's an opportunity to demonstrate our mastery in the world of what we choose and what we claim to be true in our hearts. People go around all the time, talking about how loving and spiritual and, everything else they are, and they probably are. Now the world has brought to our doorstep an opportunity to demonstrate the mastery of what we've claimed to be true. How do we implement that? And this is where everybody learns differently. So we have lots of different ways to respond to what we're seeing in the world. Are your other guests talking about this much, Julie? And if so, where do they come from on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some, yes, and it's interesting. Yes, and more generally, what actually just came to mind as you were speaking, number one is seeing this from a macro perspective of polarities. I think that's really helpful. What also came to mind, I had a friend who started, I think she did documentaries, but she had started an organization called Seeds for Peace. And it had Palestinians and Israelis, because we were talking about the Middle East. I'm like synthesizing and really sitting with how, what actually, for those I know listening, we want to, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone. How do I come from love and do something that's going to actually create a new world that honors our family and
Ah,
love and good?
ah. Well, now that goes to the deeper question, this fundamental battle between good and evil. People often think of a battle in terms of winning and losing. And if you think of a battle on that level, you're part of the problem. Because the idea of winning and losing is what keeps us stuck in the ancient trap of that polarity. Rather than winning, we have the opportunity to triumph, to transcend. That means to become more than the battle itself. How do you do that? If the battle between good and evil is to prevent us from celebrating our humanness, and ultimately that's what the battle is all about, then we triumph by doing just that, celebrating and living the deep truth of what it means to be human every day of our lives, by living the best version of ourselves, by loving without fear of the consequences of that love, sharing without fear our imagination, our creativity, the joy that we know is possible from the things that we envision and bring to fruition and create in this life. It can be art, it can be music, it can be community, it can be growing a garden, it can be creating a peace in a community, because there are forces out there that are pushing for just the opposite. Forces out there right now, politically, that are pushing us centralized community rather than localized community. They want centralized everything, centralized banking. They want centralized. They're pushing. They're discouraging rural living because they don't want people to be self-sufficient. They want people in what are called 15-minute cities. And there are some model cities that have been built in Saudi Arabia right now. They're some of the first places in the middle of the desert. And they're not places that I would want to live in, where everyone lives the same and innovation and creativity is discouraged. Uh, Everyone is dependent upon a centralized authority for food, for water, for their existence. That flies in the face of human nature, of human sovereignty, of human freedom. And this is where these ideas, there's a fine line between the ideas themselves and the spiritual implementation. And then the politics come in, Julie, because they're creating the policies and the laws that determine how we live our lives, or how limited and how much our lives are limited. So if you look closely, you don't even have to look at every one. Just look at the principles that are being proposed right now. Do they foster freedom, sovereignty, and creativity, or do they foster control, contraction, and homogenization, everything being the same? And the answer to that question for you, or whoever's asking the question, will tell you where those policies are going. And they're being driven largely by people that we never elected to represent us. Unelected people in organizations, UN is part of that. Not the whole UN. There are good people and good policies in the UN, but there's a part of the UN that is not like the UN used to be, United Nations, and they are full steam ahead on what are called the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals they want to meet in 6 years by the year 2030. The only way, the goals are beautiful, Julie. If you go to the website and you read the goals at face value, who wouldn't want those goals? Like end poverty, uh, end disease in the world. I mean, who doesn't want that? Now you read the fine print. How will they accomplish those goals? It is horrendous. It's not the world I want to live in. It sounds like a world out of 1984. a world where everything is digitized, everything is controlled, people are digitized, uh, we lose the opportunity for self-expression, creativity, imagination, compromise a lot of our sovereignty to accomplish those goals. And a lot of people don't even know that it's happening to us, and a lot of people don't even know that these things are out there. So this is an example of where deeply spiritual principles are being challenged by policies that determine how we live our lives and how our children live their lives, and our ability to share and instill within our children values that we cherish, but those values don't fit into this vision. So when we live the best version of ourselves, what we're doing is what Buckminster Fuller said so beautifully before he passed in the early 1980s. He said, "You're never going to change the world by fighting against the things you don't like." He said, "You want a new world?" He said, "Find a new way that makes the old way obsolete. People will follow the new way and the old way will collapse." The new way is to live the best version of ourselves, the deep truth of what it means to be human, and to celebrate that, because those are the qualities that are being challenged, and some people want to defeat those qualities. They don't like this is another conversation on what's called the transhuman movement. Trans means beyond. The movement to replace our biology with technology that steals from us our humanness. And there's a place for transhumanism in our lives. There are beautiful beautiful technology that's being developed. For example, this is in the news today, so we can talk about this. There is FDA has approved a computer chip to be placed into the human brain that allows us to communicate with our computer with no cables. You can communicate with your keyboard, no cables. Young people say, "Man, that's sweet. I can do my games with no cables. I can do the games with my mind. What's wrong with that?" The flip side, and whether we're talking about computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, replacing our immune system, sensors under the skin, replacing our senses, is that the way the human body is made, Julie, is that our uniqueness, our abilities begin to atrophy when they're not used. When neurons are replaced with computer chips, when an immune system is replaced with chemicals, when senses are replaced, or logic is replaced with AI, then our cells, because there's no demand for them to be used, our body begins to say, "Oh, well, maybe you don't need this function anymore." And so it begins to atrophy in one generation. Next generation, which is just a baby away, next generation says, "Oh, that's something we used to do, but we don't need that anymore." And pretty soon, those abilities that we took for granted, we've lost. And this is how you lose a species. It's exactly how you lose a species. Ray Kurzweil is an amazing visionary author. He's an engineer. He's a very good engineer. He is a director at Google Technologies, working with a lot of the AI. And what he says is that by the year 2035, which is within most of our lifetimes, he said all of us will be a hybrid species. We will all have technology implanted in some way to some degree, whether it's an RFID chip in your hand like they're doing in Norway, or it's a computer chip in the brain, or it's chemicals in the blood. We will all be a hybrid species. I personally think that that's wrong. And I personally believe that we need to tell our young people that there's something so rare and ancient and beautiful and precious and sacred about the human body that it's worth preserving. We don't even know fully what it means to be human because we're still exploring the new frontiers of neuroscience. For example, we are on the precipice of giving our humanness away before we even know what we're giving away. And that's all part of this movement for conformity so that we can meet those those goals, those 2030 development goals. So how do you, I don't like to use the word fight. How do you counter that? You counter that by celebrating your humanness, by having children. They are telling us now that the act of conceiving a child is obsolete. They're saying because nobody knows what that child is going to be, you're taking a chance. Why not do it in the laboratory where you can engineer the hair color, the IQ, fast twitch muscles for athletic performance? And so this is one of the levels where they are actually indoctrinating young people into believing that this is something that technology triumphs over human intimacy. All of this is up for us right now. So it's not about making somebody wrong, and I would never want to do that. It's about an awareness of the pressures to conform to a way of thinking that steals from us those things that we cherish the most, and that's humanness and life itself. And the way you counter that is to live your best life. You live whatever that means to the, it's different for everybody, but celebrate our humanness, our creativity, our imagination. Don't take those things for granted. Learn new things, create new things, imagine new things, and bring them into the world fearlessly because you love what the potential is. And don't be intimidated by a system that is now telling us that we shouldn't be doing those things. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, Julie.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's just it's a zinger in the heart, in the best way. And I think this idea even of, what does it mean to even be your youest you, right? I think of it as your creative, your self-expression, your divine self. And as you're speaking, I'm like, wow, this is why 6 years ago I started this. But really, truly, I love what you're saying. This is it's so deep, and it's really having us look. My head is tingling saying this. It is not about winning. It's a triumphing. I believe this. It's how do you honor the sacredness of of each of us, the creativity, the unique gifts, the fact that there's going to be no other expression of you or me or anyone listening ever again as yourself. Putting past lives aside, no way you're going to be this person ever again. And I really resonate with your message.
Well, so we're all seeing this. The world is changing faster than we could document it in the textbooks or in the classroom. We are not conditioned to accept the degree of change that we're being asked. We can do it. We can adapt if we know how, but we've never been taught how to do this. And rather than looking and talking about each one, good, bad, right, or wrong, whatever it is, look at the big picture and ask yourself the question: are the policies that I'm being asked to embrace, or the laws that I'm being asked to support, or the narrative that is coming to me and my family and my kids, does it support freedom, sovereignty, creativity, imagination, or does it foster centralized power, control, and a loss of freedom and contraction of my spirituality? And when you hold every conversation to that bar, doesn't mean you have to act on it, but it gives you a good insight. It's a tool. It gives you an insight to know where the push is, what we're being driven to, and we have a choice. We can choose. And I think that we as a species are worth preserving. I think that our freedoms and our society. I'm going to make a distinction, and it's a whole conversation we could have about America. I believe that the idea of America is rare and precious and sacred. And when you understand the history of how the country was founded, the thinking, where that thinking came from, America was given something that no other nation has ever been given. And if we lose it, no other nation will ever give its people the freedoms that we're given. And I've had this conversation with young people, Canada, Australia, Europe. They say, what's the big deal about America? We can do everything you guys can do. And the answer is, yes, you can, until you cannot, because your government can take those things from you. What sets America apart is our founders said, by virtue of us being alive, breathing, and walking this earth, there are qualities that come with that are imbued by virtue of our existence. The government didn't give them to us, and that means the government can never take them away. Free speech is one of those. The right to defend ourselves is another one, and there's a whole list of them. So the idea of America, I think, is worth preserving. The implementation as we see it today is broken. It is deeply flawed. And many people cannot make the distinction between those two. They want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over. And I'll tell you, if we ever relinquish those freedoms, if we ever do that, no nation will ever give to its people the freedoms that we have been given, because you cannot control a population with those freedoms. So I think the idea of America is worth preserving, recognizing the flaws, the deep flaws, and the deep broken nature of how those freedoms have been abused. But it's not the freedoms, it's the way they were implemented. And I think that is up for all of us right now. And they're very difficult conversations, very difficult decisions. So you need to have a yardstick by which you gauge all of those. And for me, this is where I come down on this. I can like, it's not about personalities. I can like the personality of the people wonderfully, listen to their words. Do they foster sovereignty, freedom, imagination, creativity? Do they allow my soul to soar and sing, and me be the best version of myself to celebrate my humanness? Or are they contracting, taking those away, centralizing power and control that benefits them but doesn't benefit me? And then that tells us what we need to know.
What I'm hearing is really, and I resonate, this is the litmus test. This is the question that to ask. It's so simple, actually. It's really, like you said, is this policy, is this going to add to your freedom, to your self-expression, to your creativity, your innovation, your imagination, your ability to have that, to what freedom really is not being told where and how to express or not. A question for you, Gregg, and it's funny, I was listening, I've been really looking for, and I know you have beautiful work and books, but texts, like, so I've been reading, Wayne Dyer wrote about the Tao Te Ching, and it's a great way to digest it because it's pretty intense. And I'm on like verse 65 out of, I think, 81. And it was actually talking about, it's so profound. I mean, I find that text is just super helpful right now. I probably will just keep listening on a loop because, it talks about the nature of the Tao, the way, the great mother, the divine matrix. And I'm wondering, for people listening, I know you've studied a lot of indigenous wisdom and other spiritual texts. Was this something predicted earlier on? Are there texts you would recommend, or you say go to here to, like, I found that with the Tao Te Ching, but where can we find some of this direction and spiritual sustenance for those seeking?
Well, it's a big question.
Yeah,
And
that's
I think there are many answers because everyone learns differently. Depends on what level you choose to engage in the systems that our lives require us to be a part of. On what level do you choose to engage? The deep spirituality, almost every indigenous tradition tells us that there is a fundamental, they call it a battle between good and evil playing out, where the evil doesn't always show up the way you would expect it to show up. It can show up as as the stealing of sovereignty and freedom, or the desire to remake. Our young kids, our young people, for example, are being told in schools today that we are flawed by virtue of our existence, that the human form is flawed in its nature, that among our flaws, emotion that clouds our logic is a flaw, but that technology can remove that emotion so our decisions are better. We're being told that love is a flaw because of the passion people will kill in the name of love, and they're saying that's a flaw. We're being told that the biological conception of babies, what we talked about earlier, is a human flaw because it's so imprecise. We have technology to fix that. So our young people are being taught that they are flawed in their nature, that all human life is flawed, and that we need something outside of ourselves to compete in business and to be successful in life. And that something is technology. So young people that come to our programs, and they're good people, they believe that they are flawed as beings, and they worship, Julie, they worship AI. They worship the computer. So let me just say something to our community about this, because as a scientist, I'm fascinated by this. I mean, I grew up in high tech. I went in the 1980s. I was working Star Wars Defense, SDI, the most advanced computer systems, laser systems, communication systems, radar systems. And I have yet to see any technology built outside of our bodies that doesn't mimic what we already do inside of our bodies in some way, including blockchain technology that is the basis for all the crypto that young kids are looking at. That blockchain technology mimics the way that DNA stores information: transparent, immutable, uh, long lasting. I mean, it's going to be there, it's permanent. So, blockchain technology actually mirrors that. So, the reason I'm saying this is because our young people are being taught they need something outside of their bodies. Are computers fast? Yes, absolutely. Are they efficient? You bet. They could do lots of calculations very efficiently. But here's the thing that people miss: a computer chip is limited in its function by the physics of the stuff it's made of. So if it's a silica based computer chip, it information will never be able to move between one atom of silica and another any faster than the physics of silica allow, and it tops out. That is an upper limit, and it maxes out, can't go any further than there. What is the limit of a human neuron, or what is the limit of a human cell? And the answer is we don't know, because every time we push a neuron to what we think is the limit, the accepted limit of the past, we adapt. And now we exceed that limit to become something else. The perfect example used to be when scientists studied brain states. 40, 40 hertz, 40 cycles per second used to be the top. I have textbooks that show the frequency of human brain, 40 hertz maxed out. They said the human brain can never process any faster than 40 cycles per second. Then the Tibetan monks came along and they said, well, if we do a certain kind of meditation, we can exceed that. And they then pushed from 40, they doubled that. They went to 80 cycles per second. Scientists said, okay, well, we were wrong, but the human brain could never process faster than 80 cycles per second. They had to have new brain states. They went from, they had to create the gamma brain state. Then they had to create the hyper gamma brain state, because then they went to 80 cycles per second. Then they went to 100 cycles per second. And then the scientists said, well, we'll never exceed that. And the monks and the nuns, they said, well, if we do this certain meditation, then they went to 200 cycles per second. But not only that, on the other end, they had to create the lambda brain state on the upper end. They had to create the epsilon brain state on the lower end, because they were able to slow the brain down to less than 1 cycle per second, 0.1 hertz, where many people would think that you're no longer alive, but they're very alive in that brain state. And what it does for me, it makes me wonder how many people have registered a low brain state and doctors gave up on them, when in fact it could be, I'm not saying in all cases, because there are other extenuating factors, but it could be uh, a deeply healing brain state where the activity is lowered to such a degree that the brain goes into a mode. In other words, the energy is not going to the brain's sending the energy to the rest of the body for healing. So it's like in standby mode, if you want to think, or when the computer goes to sleep, you close your Mac and it goes to sleep, conserving energy it's using for something else. So the point of this is we don't know what the top end of human performance is, because every time we think we reach it, we adapt and exceed that. And you can't do that with technology. So we're only beginning to understand what it means to be human. And I think we owe it to ourselves to embrace our humanness before we give it away to technology, because once it's gone forever. And so all of this is part of the same conversation. There's a vision to move the world in a certain direction, but you and I were never asked. Our community was never asked. The only way to accomplish those goals is with a level of social engineering that betrays our truest nature, our sovereignty, our freedom, imagination, creativity. So now the effort to reduce those things and indoctrinate young people, they don't think independently anymore. They have to use machines to do simple math. If you go to a Walgreens, for example, drugstore, and the electricity, the computers are down, they don't know how to make change unless they've got that computer there to tell them how to do that. They've lost that ability. And all of it comes back to the way that we think of ourselves and see ourselves. And even if you're not into all the other stuff we're talking about, you say, oh, that's crazy stuff. The bottom line is that we are given the opportunity now to live the deep truth of what it means to be human, the best version of ourselves, and to celebrate that, Julie, to celebrate all imagination, creativity, innovation, freedom, sovereignty, to celebrate those. And by doing that, what we're doing is it's actually a countermeasure against the movement, but you don't have to even know that. All you have to do is just live the best version of yourself with love. And I think that's important for all of us to know that.
That right there, that is it. To live, that is it. To live your best version of yourself with love and to support
Fearlessly, to
others.
not be afraid to love. This is the thing, to not be afraid,
Yeah.
to love and to express that love.
Before we wrap, although I got to tell you, because I never really want to wrap any conversation with you, because I feel like I could listen for hours. This is just, it's very soothing. It feels like a soothing balm, when you have a cut.
Well, thank
And
you.
yeah, I mean, not that you're like the Neosporin, like the,
Well, I've never been called the spiritual Neosporin. Yet, coming from you, I'm honored because I know where that comes from and I know the intent. So, thank you for that. Hope I can live up to that. There are different kinds of Neosporin. There's now Neosporin that has not only antibacterial but painkillers as well. So, I hope I can live up to all of those.
Oh my gosh. Actually, what would have been more accurate is to say you're the spiritual, the whatever it is made in our body. Well, our platelets, our ability to do that internally. You're that. The ointment,
Wow.
the salve. I, you know, I don't know if this is oversimplifying, but one quick question, just as you were talking about the idea of good and evil, I've a lot of what's covered here, we talk about ego
Sure.
versus coming from heart. And it might be, I'm thinking for those, sometimes I can actually hear questions that are coming up. To me, there's something about this that also has that aspect in it too. Like, maybe you can share about that ego versus
I,
heart.
I, I probably see personally, because I've asked myself the same question. I think that the ego is the part of us that can be co opted by evil forces, but the ego is not evil in and of itself. I know there are a lot of people that demonize the ego. When I think of evil, evil is anti life. And when we see atrocities that humans create, assuming that they are humans, have created against other humans, and it happens in war frequently, it's an aspect of war. the only way that one human can do the things to another human that we know have been done, whether we're talking about, you know, World War II and the Holocaust, or we're talking about Vietnam that was happening there, or we're talking about Ukraine, or we're talking about Israel, is to dehumanize the other person, to stop seeing them as a human life. And that is evil. The evil is anti-life. Anything that stifles or steals life from a living being, stifles the freedoms and the creativities. That is how evil expresses itself in our lives. And deception is a big part of this. It's very easy to be deceived on the surface uh, by forces and individuals that succumb to those forces because they say one thing, uh, or they are attractive, or they have a good personality. But then you look at what they do and how they do it. You talk to the people that live with them day in out, day in and day out. Maybe their staff that sees them when they're challenged and how they respond to what life brings to their doorstep, and it is very revealing in terms of, and we see this happen all the time because they're not living what they speak. And I think evil plays out in a lot of ways, but we are, as a scientist, what I can say is there are many systems that tell us we are living the close of a cycle, a great cycle of time. That cycle is a geologic cycle, it's a cosmological cycle. There are cosmological events that are triggering events on our planet. There are magnetic field cycles. There are climate cycles. There are cycles of human conflict. There are financial and economic cycles. All of them are converging right now. So I am not surprised to see that evil and forces of evil would rear their ugly heads in a last attempt to accomplish as much as they choose to accomplish before the end of the cycle, accomplish as much evil, steal human divinity. Divinity, we haven't talked about. Divinity is, if you look at the definition of divinity, it surprises a lot of people. It simply is our ability to transcend perceived limitations. That's the definition of divinity. To transcend, not just survive, but to become more than perceived. They may not even be real, but are perceived limitations. So divinity is what we've talked about, just didn't give it that name. It's the best version of ourselves. When we transcend our perceived limitations, we are living our true humanness. All right. And the goal of evil has always been to steal that divinity from us so that we don't live the full potential of our humanness, that we don't express our love, our creativity, our imagination, our innovation. So I am not surprised that as we close this cycle, and by definition, the end of one cycle is the beginning of what comes next. As we birth a new cycle, that we would see the polarity of evil uh, making a last gasp, a last stance to accomplish that goal, to steal as much divinity as possible. That's not scientific. And as a scientist, I will say when I deviate from the science, I just deviated from the science. It is my sense from spending time with indigenous cultures all over the world. This is the 42nd year I've done this work now, one form or another. Spent a lot of time with the monks and the nuns in Tibet and the sadhus in Nepal, the curanderos that we see in the Yucatan, and the shamans in Peru and all through the desert Southwest. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they actually identify our time in history as a time of a battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. And it was the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was discovered was the war. It's called the War Scroll, and it's a relatively complete scroll. All kinds of prophecies. Edgar Casey talked about this. Nostradamus talked about this. This time in history, Dolores Cannon has talked about this time in history. Cryon talks about this time in history, depending on where you want to go. So there are a lot of indications that this is no ordinary time in history, and that's why I'm not surprised that we would see evil surface in the way it does. And I think we have to draw a line and say we don't tolerate this in our society. Now, how we counter that, I'm not saying fight, but how it's countered, we have to determine as a society because we share this world. But if we accept and normalize and brush it under the carpet and discount what we see happening, then we've deviated and we now accept that in our society. And now the next time evil rears its ugly head, then it doesn't seem so foreign because we've already accepted this degree of it in our lives. That's a whole conversation. Maybe Gregg and Julie part 5 or something. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
a deeply spiritual conversation, and it triggers a lot of people, and I know that because there are so many predetermined values that this conversation pushes back on, encounters directly. And I fully embrace that and would never try to convince or persuade anyone of anything. If you're looking for a reason of why it looks like the world is coming apart at the seams, it's not spontaneous. There is a drive to push us into a way of living, into a world that has been defined publicly. It's not a secret. Go read The Great Reset, and you will see precisely what that world looks like. And it's not a world that appeals to me or that I would want the children of this generation to ever have to experience. It looks like a science fiction world, and yet it's a world that's being implemented. If we don't know what it is that's happening, it's being implemented as we speak. So we have to claim the values that we cherish as a foundation to know how to act and then implement those values with love rather than hate and fear. And I think that's our blueprint right there.
Mm. I just think, gosh, what's going through my head is what a time to choose to incarnate for all of us. Like, I've thought about that a lot. Like, wow, you really picked a really profound time to be here. And I was also, as I was looking at the word evil, I'm reminded, I'm sure you've seen this, that the backwards spelling is live. And part of what I'm hearing, the message is the way to come at this is to live out loud, to live fully expressed, to live in your creativity, in your freedom, in your sovereignty, and to
Consciously,
consciously,
with
exactly,
kindness,
with kindness.
to
Yeah.
live with
Yeah.
a deep awareness of how your choices influence and affect other people. When you speak, what is the intent of the words you're about to share? Are they to empower another person, or are they to make you right in an argument? Are they to show your superiority, or are they uh, to foster a deeper appreciation for life in another person? I mean, those are the kinds of things that are expressions of life and love and humanness. Just the opposite now is happening through technology. People fire off the words with no face behind them on a Twitter or on a text that have deeply hurtful consequences, and sometimes to the point where people will take their lives. Kids will take their lives based on the opinions that other kids have shared without ever having the face present. They're just words on the text, and we know that. So I think kindness is a big part of and empathy for what this means to another person. Are you taking notes, Julie Reisler? I can see you looking down taking notes.
Yeah, actually, I got so on my videos, people have been upset that I was taking notes and not present. And I've been trying to do I always say thank you for the feedback. I'm always learning, work in
No
progress.
problem.
However, I have been really present and I just can't help it. I mean, you just so much that you're
I felt
saying.
you fully present for the whole conversation, and I know we've gone on longer probably than we were going to. I just want to acknowledge to our community and my family out there that's listening. I fully get that a lot of the things we're saying, it's a very different way of thinking. It's not what we have been taught traditionally, uh, because we live in a society where a lot of these values have been conditioned away from us. And what I invite you to do is not, I wouldn't try to convince or persuade anyone of anything. But look at the world that life has brought to your doorstep. Look at the things that we're talking about and see what fits and what doesn't, and what belief systems serve you and which ones don't. And the ones that don't, bless them and let them go, because they worked well enough to get you where you are right now. Our belief systems, if we're here, we have a belief system that got us here. Now the world's changing. Maybe it doesn't work anymore, but it got us here. So when it fails, let it go and think about some of the concepts, that we're talking about here. I've got a lot of YouTube videos that go into a lot more detail on these things, and not everybody sees those. I also want to acknowledge that some of the things we're talking about, if you've never had this conversation and you don't have the context for it, it can sound pretty out there. I know it would to me, if I were listening to it. So I just want to acknowledge that there is a deep context, and I tried to offer some of that uh, in this conversation, Julie. And thank you for the time. I think I had 60 minutes on my. It's an interview day, and on my little interview sheet it said 60 minutes. But I personally like to allow 90 minutes to flesh out a conversation, and recognizing 90 minutes is a long time for somebody to sit. Who's got 90 minutes to listen, to a whole conversation? And thank you to those that make that time possible. Yeah.
We have 90 minutes for you, Gregg.
Oh,
And seriously,
okay.
thank you. Thank you. I know that people are, and I'll have all of this listed, but you do some beautiful sacred events. You have incredible resources. Where are the best places to find you, to find your upcoming events? Anything you're doing, Gregg? I know people are going to be like, how do I show up? Because you bring us together. We're talking about a human family, regardless of your religion or your way of observing, or we are a human family. And I love the questions that you were asking at the end to think about, and you do that. So anyhow, where can we
Yeah.
find your events?
The website, Gregg Braden, Gregg, two G's, Braden, Braden.com. Two G's means I am a Gregg and not a Gregory. My mom did that intentionally. So GreggBraden.com lists our live events. You will see fewer of them than you typically would, because I am taking the next 6 months to finish writing and deliver a book to my publisher that I am way behind on. So I tried to write it in between events and on the road, as I've done in the past. And this book, I really want to give it the attention and the time to develop this. A lot of it is what we're talking about right now. I want to do it well. So you won't see quite so many events. I do have a few events out there. I just finished a beautiful 4-day event with my dear friend, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Anita Morjani. Have you had Anita on?
I need to. I adore her. I love her message. I would love to. I love her.
She's a dear friend. I'm happy to connect you to, and Dr. Shamini Jain. And
Oh.
we had a 4-day event in Phoenix, Arizona. And a lot of the questions that you're asking me right now, Julie, came up from our audience during those 4 days. So I think you're plugged in uh, to our community, to the field, because the world's changing. We've got to think differently, and we've got to live our lives a little differently to embrace this change in a healthy way. Well, I'll get through it. The question is, how do we do it in a really healthy way? I think awareness of what the big picture and what's happening helps to make sense out of what we're being asked to do, and then we get to choose. And to make good choices, we go to our heart. And our previous podcast, we talked a lot about heart intelligence and the techniques to access heart intelligence. So I don't want to be redundant here, but that's part of our divinity. This is the thing: when we can ask for guidance that is accurate and trustworthy, that is a deep part of our divinity, that the attempt is being made to condition us away from that so that we rely on something outside of ourselves for information. And there's a whole conversation to be had around that. So this is we have our heart, we have love, we know what's true and what's not in our lives, and we celebrate our humanness. And I think if we do that, we can't go wrong in the world that's emerging, Julie. And I'm encouraged and I'm excited to share that message.
Amen. Thank you. Thank
Amen.
you. I mean, Gregg, we got to bring you back for your next book. I'm like, I'll
All
talk to you
right.
after. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Everything you just really, it resonates. And these are the questions I know I've been wondering and I've been getting. And I just so appreciate you and honor you and thank you for the work you're doing, for being a bright light, huge light in our world. And just for your gracious generosity of wisdom, brilliance, and authenticity. It's a gift. So I just honor you and thank you.
It's been a tough couple of days. I want to tell you, it's good for me to hear that today, Julie. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Mm,
And of
yeah,
course, you have no way of knowing that, but it means a lot to me. So thank you. Thank you for that.
absolutely. And just sending our heart energy to all of our beautiful family, our listeners, just to really we're all in this together from a place of life and love and heart. And I feel that. And I feel that with you.
Well, you are a hub for this community. I want to thank you for the work you do and for
Thank
making
you.
the time. It'd be a lot easier not to do this than it is to do it. It takes planning and time, energy to do this. I want to thank you. Just tell you, I recognize that. You do a really good job.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for the freedom to be able to have a conversation that's not always easy, but I think it's important. So thank you for that, Julie. I'm looking forward to our next.
Me as well.
Okay.
Thank you. My friend, I'm so grateful and honored to be here with you on your journey and being your USU. Thank you for watching this episode, for being part of this incredible community and this mission to really step into your light, to your highest purpose. I believe that as we all do that, we all can really be our best selves and uplift consciousness and humanity. So thank you. I also wanted to say that if you are looking for greater support right now, maybe you're having a health concern or you're looking to really step into that next version, best version of yourself, please come connect with me, whether it's for more resources or coaching or guidance. I would love to support you in any way that I can. Just go to juliereisler.com. You can book a powerful one-on-one breakthrough session there. You can connect with me. I would love to meet you. I'd love to hear how I can be on this journey with you. And before I forget, if you'd like a little more of this good vibe tribe and would like to digest these episodes with a high vibe community, just go to Facebook and look up the USU podcast community. You'll find us there. Love always. And thank you so much for taking the time and energy to truly stepping into your authenticity and being your USU.